introduce and welcome Steve Cantrell, Gates Foundation.
Let me start with what we're all about. We've got a big goal, and it's to close the teaching effectiveness gap. So one of the big findings, and perhaps one of the very few findings in the teacher effectiveness research today, used to be a surprise. It's no longer a surprise, but that's that the teaching difference, the difference in teaching effectiveness within school is greater than that between schools. And so another way of saying that, and perhaps the silver lining in that finding, is that even though every school has its struggling teacher, every school has somebody there who has some answers as well. And so that's encouraging, and so we're building on that. Let me start with some policy prescriptions that you're probably familiar with. I've stolen this slide from my good friend Tim Daly at the New Teachers Project. And this is a bell curve, two bell curves, one showing hypothetical actual state and one showing a desired state. You know, both in theory. But we're starting from what looks like a fairly normal distribution. We don't know that for sure, but value added assumes it, and so we believe it for the moment. We'll have some better data coming soon that I'll show you that will get us a better handle of this. But anyway, the policy prescriptions are these. Where do we start? We start by optimizing the teacher supply. What does that mean? We need to have more teacher training institutions do a better job preparing their candidates to teach with the realities of today's schools. And so, nothing to argue about there. Where do we move on? Boosting effectiveness of the teaching force. So many of you are involved in professional development efforts. Yes, we need to develop those who we have within our system. Moving on to the right-hand tail, this green triangle here. Retaining and leveraging those most effective teachers. Again, something that we can agree with. Fourth there, and somewhat radical, but I hope most would see this as a good idea. Why not assign those who are most effective to those with the greatest needs? And then finally, fifth here, contentious, improve or exit the most persistently low-performing teachers. Now that gets too much of the attention, and as Linda Darling-Hammond says, we can't fire our way to Finland. And that's true. We believe that. We see her as a friend in this. And you can imagine that if we cut off that left-hand tail, the movement we would get at the center, at the mean performance, would be pretty small, right? And so I was on a panel with her a couple months back, and she said this, and my response was, but can we get to Finland through feedback? An open question, a legitimate question, and some of the hope that's within the Measures of Effective Teaching Project, because if we can do all these things in combination and get from this wide bell curve to this narrow bell curve, not only have we moved the average quite a bit more than we could by just chopping off the left-hand tail, but we've also, if you notice, that left-hand side of that narrower bell curve moves toward what used to be average, and so we're boosting the entire profession here as we narrow the gap in teaching effectiveness. So that's our goal. This is more aspirational than data, but I'll get to the data here in a minute. How are we doing this? We're trying to provide information that you can trust. And really, the way that I think about this whole project, and as we talk about some of the supports that we're building for school districts, this is really an effort to democratize the production of information. This is not about send your information off to some smart folks who hold up in universities, and they'll come back and tell you the way the world is. This is, no, let's engage the field as information producers and users. So what does it mean, information that we can trust? There's a few tests of trustworthiness. Some don't seem so formal, and they aren't, but we need to pass these anyway, or these measures aren't going to be used. So face validity. Does our system look like something that the good teachers, the hard-working teachers in our system recognize as important to their practice? That's face validity. If we're not providing feedback according to measures that look like real practice, then we're not getting very far. Coherence. Here's something that isn't a part of the system, but it's necessary for the system's function. Are we telling people what to do on one hand, and then measuring a whole different set of things and pretending as if somehow it's all going to work out in the wash? It doesn't. We need these systems to be connected. Do we have an evaluation system that's entirely separate from our development system? You know, if so, that's more silliness, right? Don't do that. Put them together, align them. The kind of feedback that we should be giving teachers for their evaluation is the same kind of feedback that we should be giving them that helps them get better and develop as professionals. Predictive validity. Here I get a little bit more technical, but the basic idea is, are the things that you're telling teachers to do likely to lead to the results that they want to achieve? There needs to be a connection. We need to be telling them the right things to do. And then finally, scoring reliability. Big problem in our systems. If teachers believe that their rating is dependent upon the person who walks in the door to conduct the observation, then nobody's going to trust the system. And so we've got to overcome that. And so if we can get a system to pass these tests of trustworthiness, I think we're starting out in the right place. This is not a solar system. This is data from Los Angeles Unified School District. The big blue orb represents 40,000 teachers. 40,000 teachers in LA. That small gold sliver are the number of teachers who received unsatisfactory ratings in, I think this is 2005 data. I could be off by years. So it's roughly 1 in 200. Okay, so that's similar to what we've been told recently through reports like the widget effect. And so this no longer surprises people. When I showed it to my board 6 years ago, they were a little bit shocked. You know, now this is getting more common. Yeah, no, don't worry about those lines. That's fine. So that little satellite refers to just that small sliver. Now you would think if your job was to identify the worst 1 in 200 teachers, that they ought to be pretty bad, right? However, when we look at their student performance of these teachers who received unsatisfactory ratings, fully 2 in 5 had value-added performance above the district average. So all this was telling us is that our current system is broken. Not only does it fail the credibility test, 1 in 200 receiving an unsatisfactory, and there are only 2 categories. You're either satisfactory or you're not, and there's no room for growth in this language. And then second, that it's disconnected from the outcomes that matter within that system. We're building a better system, and here's who we're doing it with. We've got teachers, their unions, their administration in 7 school districts. And I need to be super clear here, we did not come to the table unless the union was there. We knew that this work was too important to be done without their good effort, and as it turns out, they were absolutely critical. You can go to metproject.org, which is our website. So we're in 7 cities. Pittsburgh has played the role of a pilot district for us. They've allowed us to break things in their backyard before we took them to scale in the other 6. But we're in New York, Charlotte, Hillsborough, which is Tampa, Florida, Memphis, Dallas, and Denver. 3,000 teachers, 100,000 students, and we are in grades 4 through 8, looking at primarily English language arts teachers and math teachers. And at the high school, we're looking at 3 gateway classes. These are the classes that kids need to pass in order to go on to college. English 1 or freshman English, biology, and algebra. Our best estimate is there's probably about 200 people spending a quarter of their time on this project right now. So, to the measures themselves, we've got a set of principles that we operate by and that we think are important for the design of your evaluation and development and feedback systems. So the first is outcomes matter. And so this says that evaluation should include, and many states now are requiring that in law, student achievement gains. Now, one thing that we don't talk enough about is we're saying outcomes matter, but we're not saying which outcomes. I think systems need to think hard about, are they counting the things that matter most to them? And if not, the recommendation would be start. We have added an outcome. I'll talk to, the state tests weren't sufficient for us, so we added an outcome. We do that in part as a demonstration and suggest that you do the same. Second, alignment matters. And here what's critical is that we don't just test these measures once. Here's what happens in an accountability system. You put measures in place, and all of a sudden effort gravitates toward what these measures are paying attention to. Now, initially, the measures may be tapping into the things that matter most, but eventually they might need to be retuned because you realize that what people are paying attention to are some of these aspects that move the measurement but aren't moving the performance that these measures were once associated with strongly. And so it's a continual revision process. So what we say is, hold tightly to the concept of measurement, but hold loosely to your measures themselves. They need to change. This instrument that I shared in LA, I taught in LA Unified in the late 80s, and that measure when I taught was nearly 20 years old. It's still in place. That's too long for a measure. A measure will outlive its utility in very few years. And so continual readjustment is part of this message. And then finally here on these principles, feedback is the most important. If you can't fire your way to Finland, and we believe you can't, you need to develop your way. And if these measures aren't giving teachers the kind of information they need to get better, then again, we need to add some measures to make sure that happens.